Hello and welcome to today's webinar. I'm Audrey Lewis, Marketing Specialist at Telium, and I'll be your moderator. Before we get started, I'd like to go over a few housekeeping items. This webinar will last approximately 45 minutes and will be recorded. The recording and slides will also be made available after the session. Next, we have some related resources available for you in the attachments and links section of the platform, so please feel free to engage with them at any point. Lastly, this is the third session in our 5-part Masterclass series on preparing for life beyond the third-party cookie. This series is geared to help advertising, analytics, and customer experience professionals not only survive, but thrive in the cookieless world. Today, we'll be talking through the changes happening in the identity landscape and how you can start preparing for them. In our previous sessions, we've discussed specific technologies and other strategies and solutions for rebuilding your customer experience playbook around first-party data. If you'd like to watch those sessions, you can do so by hitting the link in the attachments section below. Our next masterclass will be on June 10th, and we'll be sharing ways to prioritize privacy and implement value exchange into your strategy. You can again register for that session or any other sessions using that link in the attachments. Now on to today's presenters. Sav Khatan is the Senior Director of Product Strategy at Telium. He has over 2 decades of MarTech strategy experience under his belt. Sav advocates leveraging workflow, content, tools, and insights to unlock the true potential of first-party data. In his role at Telium, he helps brands transition from channel-based to audience-based marketing through technology, data, and operational strategy. Sarah Sembel is a seasoned digital marketing professional with an extensive background in providing digital and data-driven strategies for a range of client sectors, including retail, franchising, education, gaming, publishing, and travel. She has been with Telium for over 3 years and currently leads Telium's Asia Pacific Customer Success Manager team, driving adoption and customer growth. And with that, let's get started. Sav, over to you.
Thank you, Audrey. Hi, everybody. So this topic is probably not new to any of you. It is definitely seems all-consuming in the ad world and the MarTech world right now. What's happening with the loss of cookies and identifiers. So today what we want to do is try to give you some idea of why the cookies matter, what's the importance of cookies in the ad tech world, what happens when the cookies are going away, and why there are so many identifiers showing up. We want to give you a little bit more insight into some of these ID options. We're going to talk about 3 of them and give you some ways to think about them. And then Sarah will talk about what are some strategies and what's a way forward. And then we'll wrap up with some final thoughts. So with that, let's get started. Every time I see this photo, it makes me smile because these cookies are actually cool and the third-party cookies are driving all of us crazy, right? So what does it look like at the intersection of IDs and third-party cookies, and what's going on? It feels sort of like this, right? Like an avalanche of Tupperware. And I love this image because if you watch her feet, you can see like she totally commits to this. But that's sort of what it's felt like ever since Apple showed up with their decision to get rid of third-party cookies back in 2017. There's 2 big players in this space. It's the technology platforms and the regulators. These are the 2 big players. And once Apple showed up in 2017 and said that they're going to start blocking and then completely blocking third-party cookies, Firefox followed, then Chrome has announced. And last month, Apple's iOS 14.5 went live, where they've completely blocked the IDFA sharing without the opt-in that the users have to do. In parallel to this, we have the regulations that have been coming. Of course, GDPR is the big one that we all know from EU, and now it's getting copied all across the world. CCPA showed up last year, and it's already changing. And all this is leading to a lot of uncertainty in 2021. We don't know where we're going to land with the cookies going away. We don't know what some of the changes in the browsers are going to look like. Google is starting to respond to some of the changes that Apple has said with their device identifiers, so they might follow suit on Android. And we don't know exactly what Chrome is going to do. And at the same time, there's about 20 to 27 regulations that have already been finalized and announced. Some of them already signed into law all across the world. So we have a lot of change coming in this space. And that's one of the big reasons why these identifiers and these cookies are so heavily impacted. So if we keep thinking about that, Why are cookies so important in the ad tech ecosystem? We talk about this topic a lot, but why is it so important? And the reality is the cookies have been the core of how all the ad tech tools have identified us as consumers and website visitors and digital natives throughout all the channels. From monetization for publishers. If you're a website that actually has ad inventory and you want to sell those ads, to revenue for advertisers, people who are actually buying these ads and transacting through them, to us as consumers seeing relevant advertising, that red shirt that follows you around, or those really annoying pair of headphones that you want to buy but you shouldn't buy, that follows you around. That's happening in my life right now. Or whether it's attribution, what's working in what channel, which click got you the actual sale, and how many other ads this person saw. These are all things that were enabled for many years primarily because of cookies. Cookies made it so that we could get identified without having to tell these ad platforms who we were. They were able to keep identifying that it was us through our browser, through our device, through our app, and then connect all the dots in the digital world, and then show us the relevant ads, or show the advertiser all this attribution information or measurement information. These were the cookies have been playing an integral part of how the ad ecosystem evolved so fast over the last few years. So if we look at it from the funnel point of view, the role that identifiers and cookies play in this entire funnel, all the way at the top is, the unknown unknowns or the unmet prospects. These are people that you would like as your customers at some point, but they have had zero interaction with your brand at this point. Then let's say they come and interact with you in some of your channels. Maybe they click on a website, they click on an ad, they search for you. Maybe they come to an event. So they have engaged with you, but you still don't know who they are personally, but that you have some sort of behavioral data on them, and that's probably where a cookie gets created. Then let's say they actually identify themselves and they become a lead. Now you know who they are, but they've still not bought anything from you. And then the last part of the funnel, once they become a customer. This is your typical funnel. It can apply to most businesses. And on the left, you can see all the different activities that marketers and advertisers have to do. And pretty much all of these activities require some sort of identifier or cookie to enable these activities. In fact, in a survey, eMarketer found that other than frequency capping, the marketers and advertisers said all other activities on that list were critical to their business success. Onboarding data is when you would actually take your data and make that match it with a DMP or with an ad tech provider. Measurement, activating these people across all your platforms, and then cross device targeting, which we'll talk about in a second, which really enables personalization, and none of that being possible without enriching of these data sets that you have. So these activities are very closely related to each other. There's a lot of overlap, but none of them are possible without the identifiers and cookies. And that's the reason why this topic is becoming so relevant to all of us. Because if you're in the marketing space, and especially if you're a brand that relies heavily on advertising, whether you're targeting customers through advertising or whether you're actually trying to sell advertising, you're getting affected by these cookies. So that's why this topic is so relevant. So let's actually look at the anatomy of a cookie and just understand this flow a little bit more. Let's go a little deeper. So we're going to talk about what client-side and event delivery looks like. So for every event or behavior or action that's happening in our digital world, especially on a website, what role does the cookie play? So let's imagine that a user arrives on a website, and a typical website will have consent management now, especially in EU and now even in the US, and very soon in most parts of the world. And they usually have pixels or tags that are sitting there waiting to get triggered. Now, if you use some sort of plugin in your browser, like a Ghostery or one of those plugins, you could probably see that a big publisher site like CNN probably running 70 to 90 tags at any given time. And that's a big reason why the consent management layer is becoming so important. So this is the world that you would land into as a digital visitor, as a website visitor. And once you click, then you create this the cookie gets created on the first action on the website, depending, of course, on how the website is set up. And if you look at these two lists down here, on the left is the behaviors, right? Whether the user browses a page, if it's an e-commerce site, whether they add something to the cart, they complete an order, maybe they don't check out, and then maybe they log into an account. These are all behaviors that the user will do. And then on the right side is almost like a ledger, a log of the behaviors adding up over time. What are all the products that this customer has viewed? What are all the products that they've added to cart? When was the last time that they visited? When was the last time that they logged in? So if you were to break that down a little bit, the list on the left, the behaviors, those are based on each session. Every time they come back to the site, they repeat some behaviors. And the list on the right, that's based on the browser, or what we call the visitor sometimes, because the cookie and the visitor, they get used interchangeably a lot. And that's a big reason why these cookies were so important. So now that cookie is holding information about this visitor's behavior over time, and it's developing this log of everything this visitor has done. And the website could have lots of different cookies, especially from all the ad tech vendors. Each of them would put a cookie on here. So if you look at the ad ecosystem, and there's a DSP, an SSP, and then the DMP, they would all have their own cookie on this site, in addition to the cookie from the website itself. So this cookie is cataloging this user's behavior over time. And these cookies were allowed to persist for about 365 days, for a whole year. So that's why Apple really cracked down on the system. And it was a good thing, because they were getting misused, no question. So now you have the user coming back to the site multiple times. And as they take actions and as they do different behaviors, these cookies start to collect a running tally and a log of all the behavior. Now, let's say that these tags have to fire. That's when they send information to these ad platforms. And what's going in that information is data based on these events that we just saw. So the pixels will send events based on the actions that the user took on the website, whether it's add to cart, web page view, autocomplete, login. And then the cookie will also send all the stuff that it held in its own code, product IDs, the added to cart, these things like that. And then based on this information, the ad platform will send back a relevant ad that will then be displayed on the website. So this is the round chain that happens every time you see an ad on any website. The website is sending information that's made up of the data that's being created by the user behavior and the data that's held in the cookie. That's being sent to the ad platform. That cookie usually has an ID. You can see here ID 123. Each cookie has a unique ID, and sometimes it has personal information in that cookie. And using that ID and personal information, the ad platform then sends back relevant ads. Now, if you play this out, think about all these different types of segments that are so critical to the way we target ads, right? People who've come to the site in the last 30 days or in the last 60 days, people who've been to the site before, people who browsed a certain product in the last 30 days. That red shirt we talked about, who looked at this shirt before? I want to lead with that. People who've seen specific products, people who started filling out a lead form and then never finished it. Those cart abandonment emails that we all get, or those cart abandonment ads that we all get, those are all driven from these kinds of segments. Now you can notice that these segments are 30-day, 60-day segments, but cookies, especially in Safari and Firefox, already don't last beyond 7 days. So suddenly all these segments are not available to the advertising platforms or to the advertisers like they were before. That's the world that's changing. And that's why it's getting so tricky, especially if you're not authenticated, if you're an anonymous user, and these are third-party cookies, these targeting segments are suddenly not going to be available to you as easily as they used to be with the third-party cookie. So now going back to the funnel, right? This is what we're looking at in the funnel. The part of the funnel that will get impacted will be the top part, especially the part that you don't know who the customer is yet. They haven't either interacted with you or they haven't told you who they are. That's the part that gets affected the most. The ability to identify and target and convert the customers in this part changes, because now you don't have that cookie ID to keep track of who this person is and what they've done. And then in the second part of the funnel, in the lower part of the funnel, you lose the ability to track them across sessions, across device, across domains. All these things start to get really affected. Now, Sarah, in the second part of this masterclass, will talk a little bit about how you can respond to these things. But these are all the changes that are happening in our world that we have to start thinking about. This is a very big reason why publishers, advertisers, marketers are starting to pay attention quite seriously to the change in the way the cookies work. So the four big areas that are getting affected in digital marketing with the change in cookies and identifiers. First one is acquisition that we just saw. In the part of the funnel where you don't know who your customer is, and even if you know them, if you want to go find them across the web, cookies was our currency that the whole ad tech ecosystem was using to go get these people. So finding them, finding lookalikes, and then targeting these lookalikes is going to get diminished. Retention was a big deal. Retargeting and remarketing, a lot of that was driven by cookies. So that, even a lot of times without the person identifying themselves, we were able to get a lot of information about who they were just based on their behavior through multiple sessions. That ability was driven by cookies. That's going to get affected. Personalization, the simplicity with which we were able to do personalization across all our channels without the person authenticating or identifying themselves, that's going to get dramatically affected. And then finally, attribution. We were able to stitch together behaviors of these different visitors across channel, across domain, across your different properties. Now that's going to require a different strategy. So these are the four main areas that get affected, and you've got to think about different ways in which you can solve these problems. So that's really the first main takeaway in this masterclass, is your ability to reach and engage and convert customers has changed. You can still do them, especially with first-party data. Sarah will talk about that in a little bit. But the way you used to do it and the simplicity with which the different ad tech tools could just touch them and act on them, that has changed now. So with that as the backdrop, let's move to the next part, right? What happens with these cookies going away? Now, of course, we're staying with the food theme, and we went to donuts from cookies. I don't know which one's better, honestly, but with the cookies going away, we're going to look at IDs now. So what are these IDs, and what happens, right? This one is a really funny cartoon that we've all been joking about, because this is how it feels, right? What would we do if the cookies truly went away? And we're being forced as marketers and technologists to rethink this. So that's really why we're having this masterclass, right? So what started happening is the different ad tech companies, either they were data onboarders or DSPs or SSPs, they all started trying to think of different ways in which they could address this problem. And since 2017, actually even a little bit before that, these companies have been trying different strategies to address this problem and maybe to come up with a solution that might replace it. And TradeDesk and LiveRamp were the two big ones that already tried stuff out. TradeDesk actually had Unified ID, and then last year went to Unified ID 2.0. And these kinds of identifiers have all been out there, and there are a lot of them out there. In fact, there's so many that every time we make this slide, we keep adding more names to this slide. There are so many different identifiers that are showing up, and some are ideal for publishers, some are based on email, some are based on phone number, some are combinations, some are probabilistic, some are based on DSPs, some are based on onboarders, like we were saying. It's crazy. This list is long and it's growing, and there's no simple way to just make sense of this. And the reality is there's no clear winner right now. There's no obvious solution. But what we thought we would do is just dive into a couple of these to give you some ways to look at them, to understand them, maybe to make some decisions for yourself. So what we wanted to do was help you identify the big ones. So we just chose the three main ones that we would start with, right? The first one is TradeDesk. This one has been probably researched the most, I would say. It has the most partners. They're already on version 2.0. So last year, in June, TradeDesk announced Unified ID 2.0, and they completely abandoned cookies. The Unified ID 1.0 was still using cookies. Last year, they decided to completely abandon cookies and go completely on encrypted email addresses. What they've done is they've created this open source solution that anybody can use and anybody can partner with and leverage. They don't have to pay to use this tool. And once you are using this solution, then any visitor to your website has to authenticate using this solution, which then instantly makes them part of this ID platform. And then you can get relevant ads based on identifying who this person is. In their early trials over the last 2 years, they're seeing match rates of over 90%. Their target is to go to a match rate close to 100%, because now they've gone away from all the cookie syncing headaches that people have to do in advertising, and they're sticking to encrypted emails, which are very reliable. So this one has seen the most adoption so far, and this one has the most backing. It's entirely based on encrypted email addresses of opted-in users. Once you opt in, they give you a really nice amount of information to explain to you the benefit of opting in and to give them your email address. And once you do that, every website that uses Unified ID 2.0 can get the same opt-in. You might not even have to opt in multiple times, depending on how ITP and ETP and how all the cookies play out. But you could really leverage this single authentication solution across all the publishers and partners. And this one has the most chance of being successful because TradeDesk is just a very, very big platform and it has a lot of support right now. The risk on this one is that it belongs to TradeDesk. Even though they've open sourced it, they are the backbone, and their competitors may or may not commit to this long term. But because they've open sourced it, they've really tried their best to make it universally acceptable. This one has the most chance of success. So if you were going to do research, I would start here. This is also one that very easy to get on board and try it out if you wanted to. The second one is LiveRamp. LiveRamp ATS, or Authenticated Traffic Solution. This is an evolution of what was called LiveRamp Identity Link in the past. So LiveRamp is a very big data onboarder. The way they work is you give them an export of your customers, let's say all the email addresses of your customers, and they match them with their list, and then that way they can track that person through the ad ecosystem. So keeping that onboarding idea in mind, the way they do it now is they've built an API, or they're calling it an identity infrastructure. So every time someone comes to your site and they authenticate, what it does is you hit their API, and you don't actually send the email address to the API. You send what they call a pseudonym of the email address to that API. And using a combination of the publisher plus the authenticated user, they give you what they call an identity envelope that's unique to that combination. And then that identity envelope gets used through the entire ad ecosystem. So they are trying, again, similar to Unified ID, to use email address, except they don't share that email address anywhere. They don't risk exposing PII. SSPs, DSPs, the advertisers, and the publishers can all use this unique identifier. And it's showing a lot of promise in the early tests. This one is not open source. This one heavily depends on the LiveRamp identity graph, and you're very much using LiveRamp's infrastructure and their ID to deliver this advertising. So this one has a bigger risk of being dependent on one solution, and the adoption could be at risk depending on the competitor's point of view. But right now, as a technology and as a solution, it seems to be showing promise and it's doing well. So first one was TradeDesk, open source by now. Second one, LiveRamp, very much proprietary. Third one is ID5. This is a French company. Their solution also called Universal ID. So the way they are positioning this is they are not an advertiser and they are not an onboarder. They are a technical platform, and they want to give a universal ID that's an actual solution, not tied to any advertising platform. They call themselves a neutral identity platform. You pay them a monthly fee of a couple of $1,000s, like a SaaS platform, and then you can actually use their service, if you will, and use that to identify each person based on the email address. But what they do, and they believe that you're not going to get true scale from just a deterministic email address model. So they have email deterministic and probabilistic going on at the same time to help really expand the ID graph and give a much broader scale to how you might be able to actually figure out how many people are using the solution. This has promise. It's the most neutral of the three out there. And because they're not advertising based, people are hopeful, but they're smaller, so they're not getting as much adoption right now. So their success depends on adoption and reach. So, we wanted to give you sort of an idea of the three different solutions. Others are Newstar and Verizon. You can look into those if you want to do research. But we thought the way to give you context would be to just sort of, if you could look at them this way: first party based data solutions, this is your data. This is stuff that you would do on your own. Now, if you don't have a heavy dependency on advertising, then you really could do just a first party data solution and be absolutely okay. That would be deterministic matching using some sort of ID, probably email or phone number. It would be very accurate, but it would be limited to your customers and your data set. And you would have to make sure that you are compliant and matching the regulatory needs of your region. If you went with a proprietary shared solution, like we were talking about, like a LiveRamp, that one would not have to you worry about cookie syncing. You would actually have a much faster page load time because the ad tech system is using just one API. It would be very streamlined, but you would be the risk being controlled by one vendor like LiveRamp. And because at the end of the day, you still have to persist that ID over sessions, it is dependent on what happens to browser changes. And then finally, the third option is something like ID5, which is an industry shared solution. Again, similar benefits to the middle one, less time in cookie syncing and faster page load. And it's not at the risk of being controlled by one. I would say actually the risk here is it might not get adopted because of the scale of the company supporting it. But at the end of the day, it's still vulnerable to what happens with browser changes. So that's sort of where we are. The takeaway for this section, I would say, is while there are many proposed ideas, there aren't any clear winners right now. So focus on adapting your strategy and thinking about your customers, your business, your channel, so you could start embracing the change. And with that, I would like to hand over to Sarah so she can tell us what we should do about all this.
Thanks, Sav. So what is the way forward? And really, this boils down to four main areas for me. Your organization really needs to be thinking about how to get more from your first-party data. You need to be thinking about how to best utilize first-party data, your customer data, granted with the correct privacy and data usage policies in place, but really your organization's first-party data is their richest asset, and you need to consider how to absolutely get the most out of it before you start exploring all of these other options, because using your data effectively can really drive efficiency and optimization across your advertising and marketing as a whole to deliver much more personalized and relevant experiences. And I can show you an example of how that starts to take shape in your executions. In addition, change is going to keep on coming. So embrace this change, and multiple identifiers. The ecosystem is in a ton of flux right now, and we can expect that to keep on churning for a while before all these changes really level out and we start to see a clear way forward. In the meantime, embracing a multiple identity resolution strategy that leverages many kinds of identifiers is going to help your organization really weather these changes effectively. Third, and off the back of that is really making sure that you're applying different strategies to different known states. And this isn't really new either. Like Sav was showing before on the funnel, we've always had different strategies for different stages of your funnel. And this is about layering identity over the top of that to make sure that you're considering the tools and the messaging you have available at those different stages of the funnel to drive business outcomes. And lastly, as an extension of those different strategies and those different stages, really consider meaningful value exchange for identity or authenticated experiences. So providing meaningful and engaging opportunities for your customers to identify themselves so that you can utilize that data in more effective ways to provide value back to them. Asking yourself which of these ID proposals is going to win, Sav took us through about 20 on that one slide and then deep dived into 3. That's really the wrong question. It's not going to be that straightforward, and we're going to have to embrace multiple identities. That's the reality you're going to have to prepare yourself for. And what's important here is knowing, when we look at what's been going on in the in the industry, it hasn't always just been a single identity that's kind of been the basis of our strategies anyway. So having this idea that we have a multi-identity strategy in place is going to help us kind of weather these storms and all these changes. In addition, we've always really used many identifiers, specifically, email and phone number and device ID and advertising IDs. These have all been in place for a long time. So none of this is all that new. So cookies is just one of the ways in which we were targeting, and now it's going away. So really, just to sum up, we want to be thinking about embracing this change and these multiple identifiers and thinking about these different ways to leverage this different information. And that really applies to the different stages of the funnel. So if we go back to this funnel where we had this unmet prospects and this engaged and unknown area of the funnel, this upper funnel activity, the area that's going to be affected the most by this changing landscape with cookies. But it isn't, the end of times, because realistically, you have a lot more data that you can play with in this area. It's just leveraging your first-party data as opposed to the third-party ecosystem of data to try to find and engage those users. And then when we're here in the bottom of the funnel, we can still really think about what is our first-party data that we can leverage within these contexts so that we can start to drive efficiency and scale. And so one of the ways that we can think about that is that value exchange for authentication. And as an example of what that looks like, this is ASICS, for example, a shoe company, but they have built an app, or a running app, in order to kind of exchange data and value with their customers to collect information about their users so that they can provide more personalized and tailored services and experiences to them. But it's also, an exchange of data so that they can have that information about their users, what they're doing, so that they can provide that service back to them. And that really all boils down to, getting more from your first party data. And if we look at our example from before, we've got, the same mechanisms available to us on the web to collect and track users, but we also have other mechanisms of effectively leveraging and collecting our first party data. So I'll take you through this example again so you can see kind of a way to supplement the first party data into this ecosystem. So if we go back to the original example where we had a user who comes to a website, this website has a pixel and consent management on it. That website is then tracking a user's behavior and translating that and storing that into a cookie. This is all one example of a touch point in which a customer is interacting with your business. And we can see that previously that would have been sent to an advertising platform on the pixel, kind of similar to how Sav summarized it, that this is just a log and a running ledger of all the behaviors, but this is still just tied to one single browser and one user within that context. But if we start to think about the ways that we have first-party data and the mechanisms by which we can start to bring that into different experiences, we can broaden our strategies, significantly and expand our horizons to how we can target and kind of weather this changing ecosystem. So if we start to think about where else we can get data from, we have data from our first-party data sources, such as our apps or our customer databases, our email platforms, our in-store transactions. These are extremely rich data sets that, utilizing this, the same idea of consent and privacy data usage, we can bring these into the same ecosystem and start to share that via server side with advertising platforms as well. And yes, we are changing the kinds of audiences and the way that we target, but we have way more ability to weather this storm because we are changing and adapting to the industry changes that mean we can't look back 30 days anymore. So what are our changing strategies? Well, what if we had a list of all of our existing customers, all of our recent customers, all of our churned customers, anyone who has previously purchased XYZ product? These are supplemental advertising strategies that are going to help us leverage our own first-party data in our advertising activity so that we have a broader advertising strategy that isn't so impacted by the loss of cookies. So we can see that again, similar to the previous slide, but this is a different way to think about the same strategies, but just supplemented with first-party data as well. We can still potentially have a look back of up to 7 days for all website visitors and all returning website visitors. But let's think about all of the first-party data advertising audiences that we can start to think about. All the customers, all the warm leads, all the engaged leads, all the churred customers, and this gives us way more runway to start to play with our strategies and our tactics within those advertising platforms. So to recap in terms of the major areas that are impacted, well, let's talk about acquisition. Within acquisition, we've got our first-party data that we can supplement for targeting or suppression or lookalikes because we actually own that data. We can send that data into those advertising platforms and give ourselves way more usage of that data within that context instead of relying on third-party data that we don't control. Similar in retention, we also control the data that we're collecting about our users based on the last time they've purchased from us, the last time they purchased in store, the last time they've engaged with email content, the last time maybe they have maybe you're an insurance company and you have a policy that renews every year annually, for example. These are all rich data sets that you can control, and you can start to use that information to target your re-engagement strategies on your different advertising platforms or within your marketing tool set broadly. This is all based on data that you can control and doesn't require that third-party ecosystem. Similarly, when we think about personalization, we want to think about this not just in the context of the single browser, the single piece of information that you know about a user in that one context. Let's think about personalization across the customer journey. What are all of the channels that you can combine to bring an experience to life and use the data that you have about that customer in those experiences? And lastly, attribution. I think attribution is going to continue to be a moving target because of some of the ways that we think about this in the ecosystem. And are all of the vendors who provide attribution ready to do that based on first-party data? And do they have server-side mechanisms? I think that's still a story that's going to unfold over time. So really, those are the four areas that, yes, they're impacted by cookies, the loss of third-party cookies, but they're not as dire as they sound because you really still have a lot of ways of targeting in each of these areas with your first-party data. So I will hand back to Sav to give us a little bit of final thoughts on how to really think about what's going on in the ecosystem.
Oh, thank you, Sarah. That was awesome. Every time I see all the options that we have with the first-party data, it makes you realize that, yeah, the cookies are going, and yes, things are going to change, but it actually gives you more options now because a lot of the power that the ad tech world had because of the cookie is now going to come back to you because the data is going to become yours and it's going to become your first-party data, right? So in summary, there's three things that I wanted to call out. First one is that data has been mismanaged for a long time. These cookies were so easily accessible and the data in them was sensitive and personal and was being shared very freely without any rules, without any regulation. And that's a big reason why the privacy and technology changes are coming at us. And that's a big reason why the regulations are what they are. So yeah, the privacy and the regulation changes are forcing industry-wide changes, but those are actually good. They might feel a little extreme right now because of where we're coming from, but it's better for all of us, especially as data professionals, as marketing professionals, to represent responsible data practices. So that's really the first main takeaway is these changes are necessary. We are consumers ourselves. Our personal information is out there. We should take that seriously. The second big takeaway is nobody knows what this change is going to look like. The goalpost is moving quite a bit right now, both in the privacy world and the technology world. So the only sure thing that you know right now is your channels, your customer, your strategy, and your infrastructure. So focus on that, right? Because what's happening outside, it's hard to talk about that. Somebody was explaining this to me last week that the ad tech world being almost in chaos right now is actually a good thing for people who've not taken the time to invest in their own data strategies, because we could do so much with the ad tech so easily that this is the right time to take a stock of your own data collection practices, Where are your customers interacting with you? How can you collect that data? What can you do about that? Really start thinking about that. So change is going to be here for a little while, and embrace that change and figure out what can you do in your organization, what actionable steps will help you. And just know that there's not going to be one ID solution for the advertising side of the house, but you should have a strategy for your side of the house. And that's really the last point, is this is the best time to unlock the value of your first party data. Never has the value of your own customer been so important, and never have you had so much opportunity to actually interact with this customer and to supplement the advertising and marketing with your own first party data strategies. And people will reward you for that. Customer experience is very clearly the number one strategy that's showing reward, and you cannot go there without a first party data strategy. So that's what we will say in closing. Please invest in your own first party data strategy, and please start taking your customers seriously. That's where the results will come. For those of you who want to keep learning on this topic, we have our Masterclass series. We have our attachments tabs below. You can look for content there. And then honestly, just search on Google and in other search engines for this information. This stuff is changing so fast that any article we put up there will become sort of outdated really quickly. So you just got to keep up with, depending on your business, your channels, your customers, what's right for you. And that's really what we suggest. But we'll add some content in the attachments below. And then please reach out if you want to just talk to us. If you want to discuss this with anybody on our team, please feel free to reach out. And we wish you all the best. And we hope that you can connect with your customers more easily. Thank you.